I'm looking forward to talking with you about one of the most common emotions known to the human mind. And that is fear. Do you know what it feels like to fear? I think if you're breathing and you've been in this world very long, you have learned to fear. You know, by the way, there are a couple of fears which I'm told we come here with. We're born with them. By that I mean infants have a couple of fears. You know what those fears are? The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Even babies have that. You have that? I'm afraid of falling and making a loud noise while falling. Certain things we naturally fear. A lot of us naturally fear snakes. I just was always so scared of snakes. And other people are afraid of bad weather. For some reason, bad weather just doesn't bother me. I got to go storm chasing once out in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And it was one of the most fun, exciting things I've ever done. I got as close to a tornado as one of these walls to the other. And we were in this big, heavy Dodge Dually, and my friend was filming it for a TV station, and that thing was just rocking back and forth, and it was like a ride at Disneyland for me. It didn't scare me. Not because I'm brave. It's just that particular subject doesn't scare me, but there are those that do. By the way, it's always really easy to laugh at people who are scared of things you're not scared of. Just remember, you're probably scared of some things they're not scared of. So respect the fears of others. I'm not saying we should reinforce fear in other people, but at least be understanding. What are some of the more basic things, everyday experiences that people fear? I mean, I've been talking about snakes and falling off of buildings and tornadoes, but what about things you and I experience every day that create fear? One of those is rejection. Fear of rejection. Do you got that? You have that? Some of us have it worse than others. I know for most of my life, that one haunted me, the fear of rejection. And as a young preacher, starting out 24, or was it 25, when I started at my first real church, and I never had that fear of public speaking. I've mentioned that for whatever reason. I just never had that one. But you know what I was afraid of? I was afraid of individual conversations. I was afraid of mixing and mingling after church because I was so afraid I was going to say the wrong thing. And a lot of times I did say the wrong thing because when you get afraid, you get nervous, you're not yourself. Your mind doesn't work as well, and so you either can't think of anything to say or you think of something to say that turns out to make things worse, and then you do get rejected. That was a fear that haunted me. You may have heard me say before that first year or so, whenever I would finish preaching in a service, about every other Sunday, I would dart straight to the bathroom, lock the door, and stay in there until everybody was gone. Why? Because I was so unsure of myself, and I was afraid I was going to get rejected. Now, I'll say a little bit more about that fear and how I overcame it, or a better way to put it is what God had to do in me to make me overcome it. You see, truth is, most of the things that cripple us, the fears that cripple us, the hang-ups that hold us back, left to our own way, we would never, ever go to all the hard work and trouble of overcoming those things. It's just easier to keep avoiding whatever it is you fear. Stay away from whatever it is you fear. And yet, it's inevitable. You are eventually going to run into those kinds of people, those kinds of scenarios that scare you. And so, let's say right now, you find yourself having to work with, or somehow you're connected closely with somebody who brings out the insecurities that are in you. Because we all have certain insecurities, they're just different. But some people, you ever notice some people have this supernatural gift of reaching down into you and tweaking your most sensitive nerve. And they make you go off. They fill you with fear. And when a lot of us get afraid, we get mean. One of my favorite quotes from the book Tuesdays with Maury. Years ago I read it. And Maury made this statement. He says, most people are only mean when they feel threatened. And I find that to be true. It's true in me. It's true in others. Every time I've ever acted ugly to somebody, I lost my temper with them. I said something mean. Or I maybe ignored them and tried to hurt their feelings that way. There may have been some exceptions, but I can't think of any. Almost every single time, the reason I was being mean is that somewhere in here I was afraid. Something about that situation set off a fear. And when we're afraid, our bodies react, our brains react, we get ready to defend ourselves, and the sad thing is, a lot of the things we get mean and rough about to defend ourselves against are not even a threat at all. But that's how our minds play tricks on us. Most of the things I've ever been afraid of, most of the people I've ever been afraid of, I look back now and realize they were not a threat to me. But it's not necessary for a person to actually be a threat in order to make me afraid. It's not necessary that the person or the circumstance genuinely pose a danger to me. That's not necessary. The only thing that's necessary is for me to perceive it that way. Me to perceive it that way. Let me give you a few more. Fear of failure. Fear of failure can be a powerful motivator. Did you know? I mean, some of you know what I'm talking about. For a number of years, as I look back and I see the way I operated, I remember the anxiety that I lived with, the pressure I put on myself to be excellent, to be perfect, to preach home run sermons every single week. And whenever I went home feeling like it was not a home run, it felt like a strikeout. And see, a person who's afraid of failure doesn't think in terms of, well, a base hit is a good thing. A double, even a triple is amazing. But when you're a person afraid of fear, you get into all or nothing thinking. And if you didn't hit a home run, you feel like you struck out. The truth is, we all strike out every now and then. Most of us hit a home run every now and then. But nobody does either one all the time. Fear of failure, though, I can say this, to a point, fear of failure drove me to become the best public speaker I was capable of being. For like 10 years, from my late to mid-20s all the way through my mid-30s, I was obsessed with any kind of workshop I could go to, any kind of audio instructional series on public speaking, preaching, different ways to hold people's attention, how to hold people's attention, how to set up a sermon, the flow, so that you keep people away. I mean, I was obsessed with that, and it was good. It was good. That fear of failure pressed me to work harder at something than I otherwise would have. It pressed me to get better at something. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I'm better at that than I am anything else. And it's because, ultimately, I was afraid of failing. It worked for a while, but here's the thing. Remember, to everything there's a season. There's a time for everything. Well, preparation for your life work is a season. And during that season, you give it everything you got, learning all you can to be the very best you can possibly be. But what if you can't tell time? That is, you can't recognize when that time is over. Now it's time to focus on something else besides home runs. Now it's time to focus on a different aspect of my work, of my life, my family, for example. During those years when I was obsessed with becoming the best public speaker I could possibly become, I didn't have children. And the coming of children took away a lot of that extra time and energy, and it was a good thing. It helped me move on from there. I guess what I'm trying to say is fear of failure can be a good thing to a point. But if we don't recognize when that point has been passed, we will create for ourselves a miserable existence where we're constantly evaluating what we just said, what we just did, how that report went, how that transaction opened up, what I said in that sales pitch. Teacher, how I handle that difficult parent who was upset when she came in for conference. If we don't eventually get to the point where we say, I'll always do the best I can, but I'm never going to be perfect, I can make peace with that. You know, a lot of the fear of failure really is about rejection. A lot of us grew up and we learned in school, we learned from our parents, just learned from television that as long as I'm winning, I'm secure. As long as I'm winning, I'm secure. Some of y'all are coaches. You've been coaches. I mean, coach, I would hate to be a coach in one place for very long, because it's always appeared to me that if you're a coach in one school and you stay there long enough, the good athletes are going to come and they're going to go. And your success is not entirely dependent on you. But so far as some people are concerned, it is all about you. You maybe get too much credit when you win, and certainly too much credit when you lose. By the way, I'm talking mainly today to the people who feel the fear. Let me say this to the rest of us. When we're talking, for example, about, a coach, the pressure to win. You don't have that problem yourself if you're not a coach, but are you part of his problem? Are you one of those people who has these unrealistic expectations of a coach, and you add to, you create, you build up unnecessary, unhealthy fears in other people. Part of becoming spiritually mature is not only recognizing what our issues are and outgrowing our hang-ups, it's also recognizing what other people's struggles are, encouraging them rather than discouraging them. This just hit me. I know a lot of you will be going somewhere to eat after church today. Have you ever thought about this reality? The waitress who comes to your table, she's your servant. You're in a position of authority there. She's working for you. She's put herself in a kind of a humble position, a very humble position. Her job is to serve other people. And sadly, I've talked to many waiters and waitresses that say one of the most difficult crowds that ever comes in is the Sunday lunch crowd. They're the most demanding. They tip the least. And I see a couple of heads shaking, people who've been in the restaurant business. Oh, what are you telling them about Christians, for one thing? But let's take it further than that. The young man, the young lady who's working that job, they're doing that because that's what they have to do to make a living. They have to please you to a certain extent, or else they're not going to get good enough tips to live on. Are you hard to please? Do you add to the anxiety that a waitress has every time she approaches a table, not knowing what kind of person she's going to be waiting on? She's got fear. As a Christian, set her at ease, affirm her, and if she's in a bad mood, it's probably because she just came from a table or 2 or 3 tables where they did just the opposite. Turn her day around. Now, I got to keep going here. Another fear I got to mention. The fear of exposure. The fear of opening up. Maybe instead of exposure, I should say the fear of disclosure. And that means disclosing to other people what I'm really wrestling with here. What my weaknesses actually are. What my fears are. What my failures have been. Some of you, I'm sure, go to continuing education events with your job, and especially if it has anything to do with sales, they're going to bring in some 2018 version of Zig Ziglar, and he is going to be dynamite, and he's going to have this amazing record, and he's become a multimillionaire, and he does everything right, and all the people they put before you seem so perfect. It's that way at preacher conventions. I mean, they bring in the biggest name preachers from the largest churches in the world to speak to us normal fellas. And you know what? A whole lot of people leave an event like that not encouraged, not inspired, but feeling like nothing. If you measure yourself by the superheroes who are so rare in reality, you will find yourself feeling very, very unworthy. thing is, you don't know how that person got where they are. You have no way of knowing where they started as opposed to where you started, what connections they had that you didn't have. And I'm not saying, yeah, he got connections, I didn't have connections. No. I'm just saying there are ways that things unfold in this world, and we don't all come here with the same opportunities. We do not all have the same opportunities. But have you heard me mention before that some of us were born on third base and think we hit a triple? Because some of us were just born with a ton of talent that we did nothing to earn. It was pure gift. And so the talented person ought to be the most humble person on earth, because unlike the person who worked and slaved to get to that same level, the talented person was just handed to him or her. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong. No. All of us have one thing that we're better at than other things, but I'm saying, don't compare yourself to those kinds of people. It will just it'll exaggerate your fears. And where I was going with that, about the conventions, the continuing education things that some of you go to, wouldn't it be nice if they brought in somebody who just failed miserably and made a complete fool of themselves and lost, had just one game last year? Somebody who came in last, and let them tell you what they learned from being in that position. That would not only be refreshing, it would be honest, and it would be very helpful to a lot of people, because I've learned something. I've been in fairly impressive positions, and I've also been in terribly humiliating positions. And I can tell you that the times I spent on top of the world, where everybody liked me and praised my name, what did that do for me? It blew up the balloon of my ego. Ministry for me shifted from being about God and people, and it, for a time, actually became about progressing and climbing and fame. There's not a lot that I learned there that's really going to help anybody. And I remember praying during that time when I was on top, and I began to realize my motives have gotten skewed. I've shifted into a different kind of person, the kind of person I never wanted to be. The kind of person that just wants a bigger and bigger and bigger position. More and more and more. I mean, it happens in every field. Everybody, naturally, I don't know about everybody, most of us naturally want more. More is better, right? That's what we assume. That's not what the Bible says. It's not the way Jesus taught it. In fact, Jesus said, he that wants to be the leader of all must become the servant of all. But we have to be humbled. Something has to humble us to shift us into servant mode. And I remember praying, God, something's not right. I've lost something that I once had. I once loved people. I loved you, and that was what this was all about. And now it's shifted into this ego thing. I don't know how to break that, Lord, but I pray that you would, because I don't know how to get out of it. Through a series of circumstances that I can never have arranged and would not have arranged. See, that's the thing. None of us would intentionally set up our own destruction. The destruction of our ego. God has to do that. And that's why a failure, a loss, a humiliation, something that brings you on your face before God, can be the best thing that ever happened to you. The most liberating thing that ever happens to you. Because, even during those times when I felt I had so much public approval, it wasn't enough. More only made me want more. And so it's not like having it took away my desire for it. No. That's the trick. Nothing like that is ever enough. Any motivation that's really about my ego, about your ego, ego is used, that word's used in a lot of different ways. Let me explain how I'm using it real quick. I'm saying ego is all about what I think you think about me. And that's very important. I'm trying to figure out what I think you think about me. And if I think you like it, I'm feeling good. But if I'm thinking you're not, I'm in trouble. That's crazy. That's something to be afraid of. And when you find yourself overly concerned about what other people think, be afraid. There's a time to be afraid. And when you are operating out of your ego, and that's what drives your life, be afraid. Because something is going to happen to cut the legs out from under that. And there will be a fall. But don't fear it. Because it'll be the most blessed fall you ever heard of, you ever knew. I'm saying there are things in us that need to die. That's one way of putting this. I've learned something about people who are contemplating suicide. People who are contemplating suicide because they just cannot stand to live the way they're living anymore. Let that sink in, that phrase, because it's important, the wording. They cannot stand to live with themselves anymore. So their assumption is, I need to just die. Well, they're half right. Because if they find it increasingly hard to live with themselves, it doesn't mean they need to kill themselves, but it does mean there is something in them that needs to die. There's something about the way they think. There's something about the way they see themselves. There's something about their belief system that's all twisted and distorted. And those things need to die. And I can tell you, when those things are put to death and you find yourself still alive, you'll have a freedom that you never thought you could have. And you'll discover love. A couple of scriptures. 1 John 4:18. It's become one of my favorite. I've known it all my life, but just now, recently, have I come to understand what it means. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has due punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. No fear in love, perfect love casts out fear. Some of you have heard me say that if I ask you what's the opposite of love, most people will say hate. Not exactly. Hate is involved there, but the opposite of love is fear. Let's go back to what we said earlier. You show me a person you hate, and I will show you a person you fear. Something about that person scares you. Something about that person is threatening. That's why you hate them. That's why you have such hard feelings. You fear them, and the result is it activates your fight mode. And you know what? Although humiliation can deliver you and deliver me largely from a whole lot of fears, I find that the right words or the right little scenario can pull a trigger, and before I even realize what's happened, I drop right back into the old fear mode. The sooner you recognize it, once you do that, you'll recognize it because you start saying, you get mean. When you find yourself getting mean, get away, pray and ask God, what's going on here, God? What's going on? What am I so afraid of? And here's what God's Word says to you. Deuteronomy 31:8. Deuteronomy 31:8. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will neither fail nor abandon you. I want you to pay attention to something. This verse in no way promises that you will not have dangerous, disturbing, frightening things happen. Because Jesus said in the world you'll have tribulation. But it says, don't be afraid because you're not in this alone. The Lord goes with you through this. And underneath you are the everlasting arms of God. The more you come to trust that, the less fear you will have.